Could a diamond corset have shielded Anastasia from a hail of bullets?
We had different powered weapons. They were fired sequentially, and what we have on the first two is clearly some fragmentation. These projectiles did not pass through on these first two. There's an impact site here from the second, but none of these were what we would consider penetrating gunshot wounds. This acts like a bulletproof vest. Maybe the legend is true.
Perhaps the bones found in the forest aren't from people killed in the basement that night after all. A gunshot aimed at the heart, deflected by jewels sewn beneath the clothes. The accounts that bullets ricocheted, that Maria or Anastasia and Alexei perhaps survived the initial gunfire, are becoming plausible. Accounts that for nearly a century have fueled claims by some of being the royal heirs. The most famous, the case of Anna Anderson. Anna Anderson went to her grave claiming to be the last Grand Duchess Anastasia. She managed to convince many people, including the family of Peter Serendenaki, whose ancestors were part of the Tsar's inner circle.
My mother-in-law, to her dying days, to her last day, believed that Anna Anderson was Anastasia. For instance, she had a triangular injury on her foot, which was probably a bayonet stab. She also had the same stub toe problem as Anastasia. She had the same ear as Anastasia. There were a lot of similarities between the two.
Despite her persuasive tale, after her death, DNA testing revealed the truth of her identity. She was not royal, but a former factory worker from Poland. But determining if the newly found bones are really members of the Romanov family or simply another case of mistaken identity will take time. The DNA is so degraded that it must be run through an amplifier to see what, if any, fragments of genetic information remain. At his lab outside of Washington, D.C., Coble and his team are using a process called PCR, polymerase chain reaction. By exposing the faint traces of DNA that remain to a bacterial enzyme, a single piece of DNA can be multiplied, generating millions of copies. But even after amplification, there are no guarantees that any readable DNA will emerge to make identification possible. For now, the identity of the two individuals in the grave remains unknown. But while Coble and the genetic team search for viable DNA, in Russia, Falsetti's search for clues comes to an end. As he departs for home, he leaves with more questions than answers. In the 1991 grave, nearly intact full skeletons were found. But in the 2007 grave, only fragments. Why are there so few bones? All told, they make up less than 10% of a full skeleton. From experience, he knows that the remains are likely guarding other clues beyond DNA. The fact that the newly discovered bones are in such degraded condition may actually be a clue as to who they are. He must take another look at the information he's collected. This is Falsetti's lab at the University of Florida. Here, he'll draw on a lifetime of working with the departed to bring a voice to the mystery bones. Comparing his notes, looking for patterns. He'll comb through the accounts of the executioners and see if the history and bones tell a common story. This won't be an easy journey. Some of the Bolsheviks' greatest savagery began when the shooting finished.
I'm a scientist, I'm also a father. And this is it's a terrible thing to have happened to very young people.
As soon as the killing was done, Yakov Yurovsky, leader of the firing squad, writes that he feared that loyalist troops might arrive at any moment and catch him red-handed. But as the bodies were being loaded into a truck for disposal, the plan starts to unravel.
As they were lifting up one of the bodies, she sat up and screamed. It was either Marie or Anastasia. We know that 2 of the Grand Duchesses left that room alive. Ermakov grabbed a nearby rifle and ended up smashing them repeatedly in the face until they stopped screaming.
The bodies were then transported a dozen miles outside Yekaterinburg to the Koptyaki forest, to an area of abandoned mine works.
So here's what we know. The bodies were taken into the forest. They were thrown down a mine shaft. Grenades were thrown after them in an attempt to collapse the walls.
The bodies were only partially hidden, but with dawn approaching, Yurovsky returned to Yekaterinburg to report to his superiors. Misfortune strikes again. Yurovsky's men get drunk and brag to locals, telling them how they have killed the royals and the location of the bodies. For Yurovsky, secrecy is everything, but a whole day and night passes before he can move the corpses again.
The next day, the bodies were retrieved, and Yurovsky has his men looking for a new location.
Back in the forest, after more summer rain, the ground is like glue. The truck gets stuck. The bodies are offloaded. Yurovsky is exhausted and his men mutinous. He decides to try burning 2 of the bodies. To make the process easier, the men are ordered to dismember the corpses.
So this is where the science and history start to meet up. One of the bones we have has a cut mark in it. It's a slash right through the shaft.
The physical damage to fragment number 147 supports the story of dismemberment.